What do you think the biggest misconception is the economics of the Premier League versus the Championship and maybe League One?
The only real difference is the players get paid a lot more. Right. Now, under normal circumstances, that is looked after by a mixture of relegation clauses and by particularly your first year of parachute payments, which is quite a high payment. Right. The bit that people don't see is that what tends to happen when a club is in the Premier League is it's not just the playing salary bit, but everything gets gold-plated.
Do you think multi-club ownership and private equity is that helping the game to evolve, or is it creating new risks?
Both. Multi-club ownership, I sort of get why people have got a problem with it, but then I look at the specific instances and I'm like, what's your problem? First of all, whether they take the club in a better direction to where it's been before. I always say the big judgment on an ownership group is when they leave, is the club in a better position both on the pitch and off the pitch than it was when they came, right? That's the question. And the second thing is are they open to communication? Are they? Is there a line of communication? Is there some sort of, because I do agree that just being good but also with no communication does make the fans more like customers.
Welcome to Football Business TV. I'm delighted for the latest edition of the CEO show to be joined by Charlie Methven. Charlie, how are we?
Good form, thanks, Mac.
Good stuff. Happier than maybe you should be, having swapped the climate of the Americas for the UK, but appreciate you joining us.
No, I'm back in the UK now, unfortunately, but it was a delightful 3 weeks away. And as is often the case, wondering why, as we touched down in -6 degrees at Heathrow, wondering what on earth had induced us to get on the plane in the first place. But there we are, back home, as they say.
Yeah, I'm sure it's. I like this time of year anyway. Full swing of the football season, and it's nice and fresh. We'll get cracking. Appreciate you taking the time. You've had, I guess, one of the most talked about journeys in football leadership, certainly across clubs and media and governance. Maybe for those that don't know the full story, could you describe your career briefly so far?
Yeah, I always rather struggle to call it a career because it's been a bit random. So it's more like my work life, I guess. Career makes it sound like it was a bit more planned. I started out after leaving university. I gambled on horses, then became a horse racing tipster, then a horse racing journalist, then converted into what more normal journalism, became a gossip columnist and a political journalist. And then effectively when, that was on the Telegraph, Daily Telegraph, having been at the Mirror Group before then. And with the demise of newspapers, the gradual demise of newspapers, decided to hop into, like so many journalists who need to make a few bucks, decided to hop into communications, PR, really specializing in crisis comms. Yeah. And some of my earliest clients, I guess because of my interests, where my interests lay and where some of my contacts lay, some of my earliest clients were in the sports industry. By no means all, but some. So one of my very earliest clients was Arsenal, in advising the then board on resisting the hostile takeover attempt by Alisher Usmanov and David Dein. And then pretty much not long after that, I was advising McLaren on the fallout from the run-ins they were having with Max Mosley at the FIA at the time.
Yeah.
Off the back of that, was advising the Formula One Teams Association in their rows with Bernie and Max. Then the Jockey Club in their rows with the bookmaking industry over division of how much effectively the bookmakers had to pay for the TV pictures that go into the betting shops. So I guess in that sort of period from 2006 through to 2010 and 11, I was just doing a lot of work in sport without having really planned it that way. Just that's what happened. And around that same time, or towards the start of that period, my hometown club, Oxford United, went through a series of administrations and problems, and ended up falling out of the whole league, going into the conference, or the National League as it's known now, and been bought by a couple of friends of mine, two brothers who I knew, and they said, "Could you get involved? Help us out in turning it around. It's your hometown club." They came from Oxfordshire as well, so I got involved with Oxford back in the conference days, and I guess for 3, 4, 5 years, just helped was giving certainly sort of, pretty active work on the marketing and the ticketing and the comms side, but also at the same time learning how a football club works, right? I mean, just all the different, we had to rebuild an academy from scratch. We had to start a women's team from scratch. We had to we didn't have a training ground. We had to do all of these things, right? But a bit away from the limelight, because at the time Oxford was, in the 5th division. So in some ways, I look back and go, I was still running my communications consultancy, and this was like something I was doing on the side. But inevitably, as happens with football, it was taking up pretty much like half my time. And it was almost like doing an MBA in football club management, right? You're there with practical hands-on experience, but you're able to learn your lessons and make a few mistakes away from the pressure cooker, a bit away from the pressure cooker. I have to say, it didn't feel like at the time, it felt like we were under lots of pressure, but in the big scheme of things, we weren't. We were able to make a few mistakes which weren't always necessarily, recognized that much, and learn from them. And anyhow, eventually my partners sold the club, and a new group took over, and I kept on helping them out. That was Mark Ashton, who's now at Ipswich and co, and stayed on as a trustee of the community trust, and stayed on as an advisor, and kept on helping, but was just going back to my communications business. But two people that I've met brought together during that journey, one of whom was the club sponsor of Oxford, and the other one of whom was a client of mine in the PR business. I'd sort of introduced them to each other. They got on well. And they said to me at the end of all that sort of process, and by this point, Oxford had been promoted, I should say, several times, right? We're heading in the right direction, and the whole thing had ended up being a good experience, right, for everybody. And everyone had done well, people had made money, and fans were happy, and the whole thing was good. So these couple of guys said, look, if another club came up, we might be interested in doing that together, and using the experience that there's been garnered at Oxford to do something new and fresh. I think we're sort of thinking about probably a club somewhat of Oxford size, right? But what happened was, another client of mine for my PR business was a guy called Ellis Short, who was the then owner of Sunderland, and Sunderland had an absolute nightmare. They'd been teetering on the edge in the Premier League for a long time, and then eventually they toppled over, and they'd finished bottom by like a long way. And then they'd gone into the Championship and finished bottom of the Championship by a long way as well. And just as they were completing that horror second season, that season in the Championship, Ellis decided and told his family he was going to get out, whatever it took, he was going to leave. And I just happened to have breakfast with him one day, a fateful breakfast, so to speak, to talk about the rest of his business. So I never did PR for him on the football side. I only did the other stuff. And I just said to him, like, obviously seen that things aren't great at Sunderland, but how are you feeling about it? He said, well, I'm getting out. And I said, all right, have you sold it? And he goes, no, I haven't sold it actually, but I'm either going to sell it or have to sort of put it in admin or something, because I promised my family that I am going to get out. And it was well known, reasonably well known in the papers, the club was losing 30 million quid a year, was 180 million quid in debt, and was heading into a division where it was coming to the end, it was an extra year of parachute payments, but effectively was coming into a division where its revenues would be like massively cut, even compared to the Championship. And there was very open talk about the club going into insolvency, because effectively the scale of its losses were greater than the value of the club. And that was basically why Ellis hadn't managed to sell it, because people would look at it and go, you're going into League One, okay, what might you be worth in League One, where you might, in theory, be worth 30 million quid or 20 million quid or something like that. But if you're losing 30 million quid a year, then you're not worth 30 million quid. You're worth zero, right? You're insolvent, you're bust. So there'd been a lot of arm wrestling going on between Ellis and various potential buyers, where the potential buyer would have a look at it and would say to Ellis, basically, you're going to have to give it to us because it's losing so much, right? If we're going to have to cover the costs for a couple of years, by the time we've covered the cost for a couple of years, we're already going to be 50, 60 million quid in. So, you might think it's worth 30, but if we're 50, 60 million quid in before we've even managed to get anywhere, then it's not worth 30 right now, is it? So anyway, the long and the short of it is that we ended up buying it for, a sum which was not zero, but was not substantial by the standards of a large football club. And then we had to like back ourselves to try and get that loss down from 30 million quid, because, you know, with the best will in the world, there was no way in which the club could survive losing 30 million quid a year in League One. That's just not, you know, not viable. Now, of course, we had to do various things which any corporate leader would understand you have to do, ranging from the totally ridiculous, like firing all the chauffeurs that they had there and firing the guy who was hired to move the pot plants around, to much more difficult decisions, you know, where you're inheriting a Premier League infrastructure which is in League One. Obviously, you've got all these players who are on Premier League contracts with Championship relegation clauses, but not relegation clauses to League One. So you had guys who'd been on 4 or 5 million quid a year in the Premier League, who'd come down to 2.5 to 3 million quid a year in the Championship, who are now on 2.5 to 3 million quid a year in League One. And we had 6 or 7 of those players, right? So there was a huge amount of work to be done. It was just a psychologically challenging time. It was actually also financially, you know, just in terms of trying to get those players off the books, in terms of trying to cut the fat without cutting the muscle. You know, so how can we try and get the cost down but still keep the Category 1 status for the academy, right? It's those types of things, because most League One clubs don't have Cat 1 academies that cost 3 million quid a year. But equally, a Cat 1 academy is really important. If you've got one, keep it. Because you've already the club has already invested the money in the infrastructure to have a Cat 1 academy. And if you can keep it going, and if the club then does start to progress, then having a Cat 1 academy is a great advantage to you. But at the same time, spending 3 million quid a year on your academy, when you're in a division where most clubs are spending 600 or 700 grand on their academy, is of course very challenging, etc. So really that first 18 months was a really tough financial turnaround. And obviously what you're hoping is at the same time, you're going to get promoted, right? Now, is a hope, because you know that the team has been spiraling out of control, has just finished bottom of the Championship by 10 points or something. It's like, you know, it's not, it's by no means a given. And of course, as was related in the Netflix series, you know, we got beaten by Charlton, ironically, in the last kick of the game at Wembley in the playoff final. And, you know, that obviously was an absolutely gut-wrenching moment. But, you know, as they say in football, it's the low moments being that low that make the high moments seem that high. Second season, when COVID hit, we were 2 points off the automatic promotion places, and had just actually dropped 2 points, conceding a last-minute equaliser at home against Gillingham the previous weekend, which otherwise would have seen us be promoted. So we sort of felt a little, you know, but in retrospect, I think that the club needed 3 or 4 years to sort itself out. Certainly 2 or 3 years to sort itself out, and to get back into a mindset of understanding that success in football has to be earned. It's not given. It has to be earned. And gradually we put the people in place who are now all still in place, like the technical director we appointed, the recruitment director we appointed, and they've done a fantastic job. And my former partners, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus and Juan Sartori, who are still the owners there now, have also done a great job, because there have been times in the 2 or 3 years, whatever it is, since we left, since Stuart and I left, that they've also been under a lot of pressure, but they've actually they've stuck with the strategy. They've stuck with it, and they stuck with the same executives, stuck with the same plan. And that's like so much harder than people imagine, like the amount of pressure you come under to change everything, you know, just like change. But they're now demonstrating the value of having a plan, keeping to the plan. And this is the same plan that was put in place like 5 years ago, right? And it's just been kept going and going and going and going, to the point where everyone in the club really knows and understands what that plan is. So I give all those guys a lot of kudos for, like, you know, what's happened in the last few years. It could not have been achieved without the foundation that we built in terms of getting the P&L under control and making sure that we cut the fat without cutting the muscle. And indeed, the promotion that we got to the Championship, obviously you had to get promoted to the Championship in order to get promoted to the Premier League, and so on and so forth. But really, overall, we think that's taken 7 years from rock bottom to being in the top 10 in the Premier League. I would say that is a fair achievement. So after we sold out of Sunderland, I took a year out of football. I was doing some work back in horse racing, and then a group of investors approached me from the US and asked me to find them a club. And We did. They wanted a similar kind of thing, but preferably London-based. Did Charlton. I won't go into all the details of how difficult that deal was to do. It was a very difficult deal to do, but we got Charlton and got it at a good price. And this time, in a way, all of the learnings from Oxford and Sunderland, and from my consultancy time, because I was at Spurs consulting as well for 18 months, all of those learnings, in a way, were then able to be put to play in Charlton, and we were able to do the turnaround more quickly. It was also in a terrible place when we got in there. I think when we first went in there, they were 20th or 21st in League One, and really had sort of major structural problems, etc. But this time, I think gradually you learn how to get these turnarounds done a bit more quickly. That first year was still tough, because things on the pitch always lag what happens off the pitch. So the fans think, well, you just come in, you sign a bunch of players, and the whole thing goes brilliant, right? But that's just not how it works, because you've got problems like Charlton had a massive injury problem. They just consistently had the most soft tissue injuries in the Football League. So turning that situation around was never going to happen in 1 or 2 months. It involved hiring a top performance director, who then told us that we had to turf up all the training grounds because the drainage had collapsed, which meant that the players were not running on a consistent surface on a day-to-day basis. We were either getting so many hamstring injuries. He then had to reorganize the medical departments, the physio departments, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. You have to work out, okay, we're not going to be Brighton, we're not going to be Brentford. We still need to have a functional data research operation, data analytics operation. How's that going to link into our recruitment operation? How are we going? What kind of recruitment strategy are we going to follow? How are we going to apportion our capital? Charlton's got a top academy, so how are we going to link all that together? So I think probably it took us, from taking it over, it took a year to get all of that stuff right, and then once it was all right, then it then started to motor and do well. And then coming off the back of that, went to help a friend of mine who's got the top club in the Caribbean region, and been helping him run that. At the same time, he and I bought a club in Belgium, which I'm running on a week-to-week basis as well. So it's been busy, still, like mostly football, involved in football. But that's the journey, Mac. I don't know if I've kept it short enough. How long's that taken?
About a 15-minute intro, so not bad at all. No, there's a lot to talk about, mate. It's been an incredible journey. I think one of the things that I recognise as a similar journey to you into football, which was almost not by mistake. I've always loved the game and been around it, but I come from a commercial background, not in PR, but in advertising. So, not a traditional kind of operational or finance-based CEO role for myself. And similar to you, did a lot of learning on the job, not at the kind of level that you had to, because you were certainly being scrutinised a bit more than I would have been outside of the boardroom. What's it like to do that? Because I mean, you mentioned the turnaround at Sunderland and then Charlton, and I've got friends that are fans of Charlton. Actually, I think you did a great job, by the way. What's it like leading a club when it probably feels like every decision that you make is analysed almost daily by supporters, certainly at a club the size of Sunderland, which is a huge place, right?
So there are certain decisions that do get analysed, the ones that are publicly apparent, and there are certain decisions that don't get analysed because they sit behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The more important decisions sit behind the scenes, mostly. And therefore, you end up often being analysed, what I would say are the wrong things, because they're the things that people can see. Now, obviously, things like who the board appoints as a manager, I would never make myself solely responsible for appointing a manager. I would always want that to be done primarily by the technical director, or at the very least to have somebody of very significant football experience on the board who ran that process. Someone from a professional football performance background. And obviously, I'd hope over the last 15 years, I now know a lot more than I did 10, 15 years ago about how to go about selecting a head coach. But nonetheless, the point still stands. That is a public decision that will be analysed, right?
Yeah.
And you understand that. But as a CEO, really, the majority of the things that you're doing is putting in place the building blocks behind the scenes and recruiting people to positions which often won't be apparent. Like when people talk about Sunderland now, how much they talk about the sporting director, Christian Speakman, and the recruitment boss, Stuart Harvey, not that much. But those two guys have been the constant. Those two guys are the ones who have actually been the ones who have done it effectively with the backing
Great job.
done a great job. But so when we appointed those guys, were those decisions that were massively analysed? Not really, right? But when we appointed Phil Parkinson as manager, was that a decision that was massively analysed? Yes, right. So yes, you are analysed, and you understand the things that you'll be analysed for. But ultimately, what you have to understand, as you would doubtless know, is that you have to wait for the outcomes to become apparent and understand that in the end, you'll be judged on the outcomes in the end.
Yeah.
The beauty of football and the trouble with football is that it rests on fine margins, right? And that's what makes it a brilliant spectator sport, because in most sports, you can kind of more or less predict who's going to win before the game because they're just better. In football, even if you know that one team taken over 50 matches might be better, because a goal is a rare event, the other team can easily win. Easily. Yeah. And you know that, right? And the same thing happens. I was reading recently Ian Graham's brilliant book, How to Win the Premier League, and explaining how big a part luck plays. On the one hand, you can have a plan. Hopefully you gain over time operational competence. Hopefully you start to learn how, the ins and outs of doing things. But there is, in the end, an element of luck as well. And sometimes it goes with you and sometimes it doesn't go with you. And that can be really, really tough when you're being massively criticized for something which was very marginal, like very tight. But equally, you have to look at it the other way and say, well, there have also been times, like you said earlier on, that your Charlton mates have said, what a great job we did. It's like, would they have been saying that if that playoff final had gone the other way? Right? One game, one tight game, gone the other way. So, look, it comes with the territory. And I always say, no one makes us take these jobs, right?
Very true.
If you don't like it, go and do something which is lower profile and less analysed, less in the public debate.
Yeah, no, good point. On that, actually, how do you deal with personal criticisms? I know you would have got a lot of that just by default of the job, right? Whether you do a good job or a bad job in general, there are going to be some that think you're great and some that think that you're not. How do you deal with the emotional side of football? Because, you can put in place all of the corporate stuff and strategies and operational stuff, but it's a really emotional sport, right? And sometimes with that emotion comes some, ridiculous behavior or insults or abuse or whatever. How do you deal with that and then, continue to motor forward?
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
That anyone who goes into football and isn't able to cope with constructive criticism shouldn't be anywhere near it, right? And there are plenty of people I know, friends, family, etc., who, even if criticism is couched in a very gentle way, just find that difficult, right? Just find it really, really difficult. So in football, you can't be that way. Players grow up from their teens onwards being told you're not good enough, right? Or even if you are good enough, you need to be better. You should be better. Or you're not big enough. You're not big enough. You're not quick enough. Even if you're really good, today you were shit. And so on and so forth. Managers hardly need say get a huge amount of criticism, and of course, that extends to the boardroom as well. So that's one level is what I call constructive criticism. Then you go a level up from there, which is what I would call really vocal criticism. It might still be quite constructive, but it's vocal and it's in your face and it's there. And I think that is I would say it's always been there. Growing up as a football fan, that has always been there. I think there's a level above that which has become a bit more normalized in the last 10 to 20 years, which is when it goes beyond what is even half reasonable, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's an awful lot tougher. No one wins in these situations, right? It really is like taking things to a level where football should never be taken, right? No. It's absolutely valid to say, listen, mate, I think you're doing a terrible job, right? And if you can't take that in football, you shouldn't be in football.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Right? So this is I would be regarded, I think, by most people in football as having a pretty thick skin, right? I mean, and a lot of people in football do have a pretty thick skin, but I certainly wouldn't be regarded as being a sensitive soul, I don't think. But I think a lot of us do find it difficult, to your original question, to deal with a bit when it gets into the family and it gets into really like going into your personal life. And as I said, even then, it's like one thing if you are one of those owners or who has driven a club bankrupt or something like that, and you understand, like, I've destroyed something which is a social institution which has existed for 100 years, and like you need to expect that people are going to be extremely angry about that.
Yeah.
But losing a few games of football, like, I think there's a certain ceiling on what level of constructive criticism people in the football industry should be expected to get for even, let's say, not being as good at their job as somebody might want them to be. And that would go for footballers as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I struggle with that in modern football now. And we did a CEO show a few weeks ago where the guest mentioned being in Tesco's with his wife and somebody trying to attack him while he was shopping with his wife and kids and stuff like that. And you just think, come on, is it really that important? After experiences like that, what keeps you motivated to stay in football? Because it's a tough gig, right? And I know you enjoy it and you've done very well, but what keeps you motivated to keep doing it? And it's not just a financial decision, right? Because you can make money anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good question, really. I think it's a fascinating jigsaw, getting it right? And once you have put that jigsaw together once or twice and seen what success looks like and feels like, and the joy it does bring to a lot of really good people, right? That's slightly addictive, I think, more so than a lot of the consultancy work I've done in the past or whatever it might be, where you go in to somebody and you say, right, I've got some advice. And they go either, yes, thank you very much for your advice, or no, I don't really agree with that advice, whatever. And even if they take your advice and they do well, it's like you are external to the key piece, right? Being centrally involved within a football organization brings with it huge challenges, but also huge rewards in terms of not financial rewards so much, but in terms of the sense of satisfaction when you feel like I've got this more or less right. Yeah. And it brings great jeopardy because there is great despair when you know and feel we haven't quite got this right yet. So I think for people who really like to feel what I would call feel alive, to feel like they're living not on the edge, but with real jeopardy in their own lives, I think, that is something which is quite common to a lot of people in football, is that when you take that level of uncertainty out of their lives, they feel a bit flat. Yeah. Putting the jigsaw together and the intellectual challenge and the human challenge that represents, and then the bits of the football club which reaches beyond what we would normally see in other areas of business life, when you go out with your community trust and when you get involved with the academy and you start to see the ability of football to change people's lives for the better, being a part of that is much more professionally rewarding than doing a normal white collar job, right? Yeah. So you actually get to feel a little bit of the satisfaction that a social worker would feel without having to be a career social worker. I don't mean that in any way to denigrate what social workers do. I'm saying that a lot of us might feel we would love to be in a type of career which did involve changing people's lives, but for whatever reason, either because financial necessity or greed or whatever it might be, we end up trying to do things which try and make money instead. And football in some ways helps sort of rub that itch of also wanting to do something which has social benefit as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think we interviewed Jeff Lahart from the Special Olympics this week, and me and Jeff have done some work together over the last 2 or 3 years. And the work that he and his team do around the world is just incredible. And to watch his face talk about the social and community impact that they have on people all around the world, and you can see what it means to not just him but the people and the disabled athletes and everybody else involved, does give you that feeling of giving a little bit of something back. So yeah, completely understand that. What's jumping back into maybe the football business side of things a bit more, again, what do you think the biggest misconception is the economics of the Premier League versus the Championship and maybe League One? Because you probably had the biggest challenge at Sunderland of they had years of being a spending club and an established Premier League club, and then having the the rude awakening maybe of being back in League One and the disparity between the Premier League and
So
League
basically, people, I think people imagine that the only real difference is the players get paid a lot more, right?
Right.
And of course, the players do get paid a lot more. Now, under normal circumstances, that is looked after by a mixture of relegation clauses and by particularly your first year of parachute payments, which is quite a high payment, right? So that bit normally should be sort of okay. The reason at Sunderland that bit wasn't okay is because they then got relegated straight away again, which, as I said earlier on, made those relegation clauses not work, right? Because if they had been the Championship, where you get an extra 10 million quid a year of TV revenue, that would have helped the economics in the in between bit, right? The bit that people don't see is that what tends to happen when a club is in the Premier League is it's not just the playing salary bit, but everything gets gold plated, right? So everybody's pay goes up, even if they're in roles which are not, strictly speaking, related to whether you are or aren't in the Premier League, right? So, whereas you'll find that in a League One club with revenues of 10 million quid, there'll be an intense focus on, well, this person is in charge of cleaning up the training ground, right? And you say, well, how much are other local janitors on, right? Because we need to be competitive with the local leisure centre. We need to be competitive with this. We need to be competitive with that, etc. Well, okay, he's on 30 grand, so we need to make sure that we don't drop below that and all this type of stuff. You look really closely at these things. What tends to happen when clubs get promoted is that there's a sort of, well, old so-and-so who's been looking after cleaning up the training ground, he's been with us a long time. He deserves, we just got a check for 120 million quid. We can afford to have him on 60 grand a year. Come on, right?
Right.
So everything goes up like this. Everything that gets done gets gold plated, because when your revenues go from, let's say, 10 to 15 million quid in League One to 30 million quid in the Championship to 170, 180 million quid at least in the Premier League, even if the vast majority of that goes on spending on better players, more highly paid players, whatever it might be, the ability to start just tweaking up everything else you do, right, and always taking the expensive option, and that then getting hardwired into your cost base, right? So this is, again, the players get adjusted quite quickly. A lot of them leave straight away that you get relegated from the Premier League. Yes. A lot of the rest of them are on relegation clauses, and in any case, often they've only got 1 or 2 years left in their contract. So that kind of adjusts much more automatically. The bit that is much more complicated is the whole of the rest of it. Like, there's a club I'm looking at the moment, just out of interest, Leicester City, who have been I know they came down one season to the Championship, got promoted straight back up again, but basically they've been in the Premier League 10 years. They won the Premier League, they went into Europe, they won the FA Cup and all this type of stuff. And during that time, they went from being, quite a middle-ranking, parsimonious club to being a, very extravagant club. You go to their training centre and all these types of things. Everything is like 5-star. Everything's like a 5-star hotel. The idea that in League One you could have players accommodated at the training ground in beautiful sort of 5-star accommodation, forget it, right? It's often like porter cabins and that type of stuff, and using the public park half the time. So I think that's the bit which is often missed, is that the real jeopardy for a club when if they are that type of club that goes up to the Premier League but could come back down, is you have to be very, very careful not to end up gold plating everything, because that's the bit that's really difficult to adjust when you do come back down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there are some clubs that go a bit more gold plated than others, right? When they do get that Premier League move. On that front, then, is football really sustainable in the long term, do you think?
Well, it absolutely should be, right? And this is something that drives me absolutely nuts, which is the amount of, and this I know drives the government nuts as well. It drives the football regulator nuts, etc. Is that the amount of money that we have coming into the game, and how far ahead the English leagues are of their counterparts anywhere else in the world. We absolutely are capable of paying more than our counterparts anywhere else in the world and breaking even or being profitable, right? Yeah. So it's just a lack of financial discipline and a lack of the right cost controls over the last 20 years, which has basically meant that all the new money that's come into the game has just gone straight through the system like prune juice. And it just hasn't really, obviously it's gone to the players and bully for them, etc. But actually there's plenty enough money to both pay the players more than they get elsewhere and make sure that everything else is run in a really sensible way. Now, I do sense that the wind of change is blowing in the right direction. The Premier League recently voted for the first time for percentage-based cost control measures. So they'd be, if they're going into the European competitions, then they're on 70% of revenues maximum spent on their playing side. And then if they're not going into Europe, it's 85%. But if you just do the modelling on that, right? So let's say that you've got revenues of 200 million quid, and you're allowed to spend 85% of that on your first team squad, net transfer dealings, your coaching staff, etc., right? So you've basically got 170 million quid to spend on that, which then leaves you 30 million quid to spend on your academy, your office staff, stadium operations, etc.
Yeah.
Can you run all that for 30 million quid? Of course you can. Of course you can. All day long you can run the rest of it for 30 million quid. So really from now on, there's no excuse for any Premier League club not to break even. No excuse at all. Absolutely should be breaking even. League One are about to vote on rules that take them heavily in that direction, right? But on 60% rather than on 70 or 85%, maybe even 50%. And League Two are kind of already there at 50%, which then just leaves the Championship, right? And this is where it'll be really interesting to see the report that the independent football regulator is preparing, which will be delivered just over a year from now, which will be a recommendation on the TV distributions within the game. The expectation is that it will recommend that the Premier League give quite a bit more money to Championship clubs, and that maybe they cut back the parachute payments from 3 to 2. I think that's about where people think the whole thing is going to land overall. But if that happens, then it will also come with a condition that the Championship clubs also move on to a percentage-based system, because the Premier League, when they've made their previous offers along similar lines, have always said that. And by the way, they're right. They're absolutely right to do that. Because from their perspective, like, well, why would we give you all each 10 million quid a year extra if you're then just going to use that to, spunk on players, right? That defeats the entire purpose. We're trying to make you sustainable, and you're then taking the money that we've given you to make you sustainable, and you're then just going to waste it. Why would that be a good thing for anyone, right? So I've got a feeling that English football is now financially so far ahead that in 2 years from now, pretty much break even is going to be enforced on all clubs. And if you look at the mandate of the regulator, that's pretty much what the government mandate says of the regulator. And my view is always of regulators is, that their legal obligation always outweighs anything else. So you have to look at what their legal obligation is, not what you think might be sensible or what you think might be fun or whatever. So you have to look at the fine print of what have they been legally, that they have signed a contract that says, I will do this. And it says that his mandate is to enforce sustainability on English football. And since we kind of know what that mechanism is going to look like, I think 2 years from now, it is going to be sustainable. And it'll be such a relief. It'll be such a relief for all of us in the game. It's no fun running businesses that lose money. No. It really isn't. Honestly, it's no fun at all. And, however much fans always scream for more spending and more spending and more spending, having been a fan of a club, and indeed run clubs, but particularly having been a fan of a club that was constantly going in and out of bankruptcy after Robert Maxwell died, it's just really stressful. Because if your football club means a lot to you, not knowing whether it's going to survive all the time, it's just really stressful. It's really painful. Actually what happened eventually, obviously Oxford went from when I was a kid, they were in the top division. They went all the way out to the 5th division. And what it meant was that there was about 15 years of my adult life when my club that I love was playing a level of football that they should never be playing at. And it wasn't fun. And me and my mates didn't feel like meeting each other there. And when my kids were little, they didn't want to come and all this type of stuff. So you end up like writing off big chunks of your football supporting life, basically because the club had been run unsustainably before. So I always make the argument to fans, you guys should be arguing for sustainability, right? And if you make all clubs sustainable, then it becomes down to, well, 2 things. Number 1, who's got the bigger fan base? Number 2, who's got the smarter executives?
Yeah.
Right? And that's then things that, let's try and enlarge our fan base. Let's try and grow it. Like when I was growing up, I remember going to the Goldstone ground and there were 8,000 people in the Goldstone ground. Now, if I go to the Amex, it's 35,000 people, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like your fan base is set in stone. You can change your fan base.
Yeah.
from next year onwards, Wrexham will be having like, 20,000 people in. I've been at the racecourse ground, there've been 2,000 there, right?
Yeah.
So these things are achievable, but they are medium-term things. And then the other thing, of course, is how smart your executives are and, how good the setup is and all that type of stuff. Well, as Brentford have proven, even quite small clubs can get all that stuff right and do really well. So it's like trying to get people out of the sugar rush of vulgar cash. Oh, just go and wang a bunk, get your checkbook out, all this type of stuff, and try and move them on to being more thoughtful about, I want to ask questions about how well run my club is. I want to ask questions about the structure of the club. I want to understand like what the recruitment strategy is. I want to understand why the board is structured in this way. I want to understand that is where thoughtful football fans should be, as opposed to back in the old sort of, well, he's a crap owner because he doesn't spend lots of his cash on a new striker, right?
Yeah, of course.
So, in answer to your question, I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that the wind is gradually changing, and that will make a massive difference.
Yeah, it's part of the reason this channel exists, really, to kind of move the business content into the consumer or fan world, to give them a chance to maybe understand a bit more about, the jobs that people like you do. And it's crazy important. I've got WhatsApp groups that are, football business executives, and I've got WhatsApp groups that are family members that just want their owners to spend a shit ton of cash on the next shiny toy, right? And I always put those arguments to them, like, do you want your grandson to have a football team to support in 50, 60, 70 years? And why don't you care about that as a football traditionalist, right?
And by the way, most fans are football traditionalists. And
they are,
one of the things that I'm most closely allied with fan groups on and fans is the protests around not having enough games at 3:00 on a Saturday, is the arguments around asking fan groups to travel away too far at inappropriate times of the weeks, is the arguments around, how they get treated effectively as fans. Are they fans or are they customers? Well, they're fans, right? So all of these things I've got massive amounts of sympathy for, because at heart I am a football fan. And when it comes to Oxford United, I am still a football fan. When I'm in between jobs in football, I go back to watching Oxford in the stands.
Awesome.
So I still think like a fan, and I'm on WhatsApp groups with the same mates who I've watched Oxford with all my life and family.
Brilliant.
Just talking about it with them. I'm lucky in Oxford's case that they've been through such severe financial problems that the fan base is already kind of like sensible about these things, quite balanced and quite sort of like, well, we don't want to overextend ourselves. Don't forget what happened last time, and all this type of stuff. So in some ways, it's the right fan base for me in that regard. But like you, I just think all of us who really care about the game need to constantly be trying to educate people about the risks of irresponsible, unsustainable spending. Now, back in the days when English football was competitive against the other European leagues, I'm not saying I would agree with it, but I can sort of see the argument of, but if we're going to get the best players to come here and all this stuff, you have to look at the numbers now. The numbers now are quite extraordinary, right? Premier League revenues are not just bigger than Spain's. They're about the same as Spain and Germany together, right? Premier League spending is not just bigger than Spain. It's like a factor of 10 times bigger than Spain's when it comes to transfer spending and this type of stuff. I was actually having a look the other day, Mac, about attendance numbers in Europe, and they did a table of gross attendance in all the football leagues last season in Europe. The top was the Premier League. The highest number of people in Europe to attend any league was the Premier League. What do you think was second?
Go on.
The Championship.
Was it really?
More people attended the Championship last season than attended Serie A, La Liga, all these types of things, right?
Brilliant.
That is how big English football has come, right? Is that even our second league is better attended than the major European leagues, right? So we don't need to keep on gambling the house anymore. We've achieved a position now where we can now go, right, okay, all of that investment's gone in, we've won. Now let's try and make ourselves properly sustainable, because there's no excuse now.
No, I completely agree. Do you think there's been a lot of talk recently, certainly this week, Chelsea appointed a new manager from, a club that their ownership group also own in Strasbourg, and there's been a lot of talk about that from executive level right the way through the fans as well. I think the CEO threatened to resign over it from Strasbourg, which would be a real shame, because I think collectively they've done a great job there. Do you think multi-club ownership and private equity. Is that helping the game to evolve, or is it creating new risks?
Both. So multi-club ownership, I guess I sort of get it, but I don't. Sorry, I sort of get why people have got a problem with it, but then I look at the specific instances and I'm like, what's your problem, right?
Yeah.
So I look at Strasbourg, who are having the best season they've had in donkey's years, right? That for the first time in forever, they're really competitive, and the club is properly financially supported, having had problems in the past. And I sort of ask the question, well, if independence was so important to you as a fan group, why did you not buy it?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a big fan group, right? And this is a question I always ask, because the German fans have made a decision, right? Which is, we would rather keep control of all of that stuff and keep everything done exactly how we want it to be done. And we'd rather do that rather than be competitive, right? Now, Chelsea bought Strasbourg for 40 million quid. No one can tell me that the Strasbourg fan group could not have bought it for 40 million quid. Of course they could have done, right? Easy. But they didn't. So once you haven't, and once somebody else has bought it, then you need to judge them on maybe a couple of things. First of all, whether they take the club in a better direction to where it's been before. I always say the big judgment on an ownership group is when they leave, is the club in a better position both on the pitch and off the pitch than it was when they came, right? That's the question. And the second thing is are they open to communication? Are they? Is there a line of communication? Is there some sort of, because I do agree that just being good but also with no communication does make the fans more like customers, right? So I look at the Strasbourg situation, and Blueco have been communicating with the fans, trying to explain, this is what we're trying to do, this is how we're trying to do it. Now, they might not like all the answers, but it's not a closed situation where the fan where there's no communication at all, and the club is in a better position on and off the pitch. So it comes back down to want to have your cake and eat it, which is saying, well, we don't want to buy it ourselves, we don't want to fund it ourselves, we want somebody else to fund it, but we then want to be able to control what the people funding it do with it.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not a massive fan of that kind of thought process. I'm a great believer in accountability and responsibility, and there are fan-owned clubs in this country where fans have taken the decision, we know that we are going to be a bit less competitive than we might otherwise be, but this is the decision that we've made because we care about this, right? If Exeter City went out on the open market and said, we're trying to sell Exeter, come one, come all, and somebody went and they just bid 7 or 8 million quid, and all the fans who were part of the owner, sort of supporters trust ownership, and then that money was dispersed throughout the fan group, they took the money, right? Then probably the new owner coming in, instead of having to run it at break even, would probably run it at a loss of a couple of million quid a year, which means that more money would be spent on the first team, which would give Exeter potentially a chance of getting promoted to the Championship, right? The fan group has decided that they don't want that. And I massively respect that.
Yeah.
Wimbledon the same. Right. So I massively respect that. I respect what the German clubs have done. I'm not a big fan of fan groups who say, we want to be able to dictate strategy to the people who own our club, but we don't actually want to, but they should still fund it. Right. So they should fund a strategy that we want, as opposed to us actually paying for it or them getting on with doing their own thing. So I think, communications is definitely one which can be a problem. So get back onto your multi-club ownership point. I can definitely see the challenge when you see a situation like, for instance, Palace missing out on a certain level of European competition because of what happened there. So I think when I look at it, for it to really work, it needs to be very tiered, right? So you need to have one club, which is clearly the big club. Then the next club down the chain can be reasonably sized, but it can't be a club that ultimately can be in the Champions League, because otherwise you could end up with real significant problems. And then the next one down from there likewise, and so on and so forth. So I can, absolutely see the merit of having alliances between organizations with different types of clubs in different parts of the world and all this type of stuff, who can enable a more efficient flow of players and playing opportunities for players. So for instance, the club I own in Belgium, in our leagues, we have both the B teams of the big clubs in Belgium, but we also have the feeder teams of a lot of the big clubs in Europe as well.
Yeah.
Now, what that does is it means that we've got some of the best young players in Europe playing in the Belgian league, right? So it's a great league to watch. And the clubs are mostly well sort of funded, despite what is still quite a small country, because they're owned by broader organisations, right? Which then means that the facilities are better and all this type of stuff. So there can be big advantages to it, but I think there just does need to be clarity over this is why we're doing it, this is where it sits, this is what the aim is for each individual club, and so on and so forth, rather than almost letting fans have to try and work it out for themselves.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really fair approach. I've got no problem with it, actually, the modern one. I think if it's done correctly, you could build a really sustainable group of companies or group of football clubs that help to develop clubs and different levels, right? And there are levels in football for obvious reasons, I think. So there's nothing wrong with that.
100%. If someone said to me as an Oxford fan, you're going to become like the second club in a multi-club ownership group involving Atletico Madrid, right?
Yeah.
I'm not crazy enough to think, oh, that's terrible. Like, we're totally losing our identity and our purpose here. And, we could have had the chance to compete with Atletico Madrid, and now we don't have the chance to compete with Atletico Madrid. I'd be like, okay, do you know what? This could be really interesting. This could be the thing which enables us to rise from being a lower table championship club to being a championship club that could compete to get into the Premier League, right?
Yeah.
Because some of the young players that they're going to be able to send us are going to be players who at championship level could make a big difference to us without blowing our budget. Right?
Yeah.
So I think as long as everyone's realistic about it, and as long as everyone understands where you are in the food chain and understands, that you are not being prevented from reaching your reasonable potential, then I think everything you say, rings true.
Yeah, I think it's about the opportunity for players, as you've touched on there as well, but not just the loanees, but the progression. I mean, two of my favourite Liverpool players of all time came from Oxford. John Aldridge and Ray Houghton were Oxford players, and they were my heroes played in probably my favourite football team of all time, 87, 88, and they were both incredible.
So where did Aldo start? Do you remember? Where he started? Pre-Oxford. Yeah, no. Newport County.
Newport, of course it was. Yeah.
Newport County to Oxford to Liverpool to Real Sociedad.
Yeah.
Right. And until I think I'm right in saying that until Messi and Ronaldo came along, I think he was the leading goal scorer in European football history. He scored something like 500 goals, Aldo did in his career, and I think he won. He amazing. He actually won a top division Golden Boot with Oxford. He scored 30 goals in the top division for Oxford United, right?
Yeah.
Then went and won the Golden Boot with Liverpool. Then went and won the Spanish Golden Boot with Real Sociedad. I mean, he was an astonishing goal scorer. I mean,
he's one of the most underrated strikers in English football history, I think.
I don't think I've ever seen a more natural finisher, ever, including Lineker. He had a better goal scoring record than Lineker. Do you know the reason for that? Why I think he is underrated, Mac, is that he played his international football for Ireland.
Yeah, I agree.
Despite being English. And do you know how that came about? What happened was it was when he was at Oxford and Houghton as well, because Houghton was Scottish.
Yeah, born in Glasgow,
had come through Fulham, who in those days were not the Fulham that they are now. They were bottom division club back in those days. And it was the time when they changed the qualification rule for international teams from a parent to a grandparent.
Yeah.
And Jack Charlton had just become Republic of Ireland manager. This is like 1985. Yeah. This is 1984 or something like that, right? So he says to his Irish team, I want all of you to go back to your dressing rooms and ask your teammates if any of them have got Irish grannies, right? So by total chance, Oxford United had a right back, a really good right back, who played his whole career in the top division, mostly for Birmingham City and these other clubs, called Davy Langan, who was these days would be considered a wing back, but he was an attacking right back. And he's actually Irish, right? So he was playing for the Republic of Ireland team before the rules got changed. Anyway, he comes back into the dressing room and says, have any of you lot got an Irish granny? And Houghton and Aldridge put their hands up, right? These two young guys who just started to make waves, but obviously at that point probably felt that they were a long, long way away from the English and Scottish national teams, because in those days Scotland were a very strong side in the mid-1980s. So you're thinking Ray Houghton, you're thinking, well, am I realistically going to get past Gordon Strachan
Yeah, or
right?
Kenny Dalglish. Yeah,
Or
yeah,
Kenny Dalglish, right? And your Mordred is thinking, well, Lineker's okay, but I'm not sure I'm necessarily going to
yeah,
immediately
yeah.
insert him. So they both signed up to play for Ireland, and of course Ireland had a fantastic period, not least because of them. But you do think with Aldo in particular, like what his profile would have been, because he definitely would have played for England, of course, winning the Golden Boot pretty much every year he played. He would
Yeah.
have played for England, and you think, well, what would his career have been like if he had played for England? But like you, one of my all-time favourite players.
Yeah, we interviewed John Barnes last week, and he said that Ray Houghton is his favourite player ever. Which, when you think, the level of player John Barnes was, and he said, Houghton on the other side was so underrated because he just did stuff that other people couldn't do, and he was so busy. And funny enough, I played against him when he was about 50, and he was still the best player on the park. Yeah, brilliant stuff.
It's quite humbling playing against or seeing in action players of our own age who obviously have not played professional football for a long time, but who, my head coach in my Belgian club is George Boateng, who played 400 Premier League matches for 3 different clubs, I think. And George is actually 1 year older than me, but when you watch him running around the pitch and when you pass the ball to him and this type of stuff, you're like, okay, he's still just miles better than me.
Yeah. Was hoping the knees were caught up by now. Yeah,
it hasn't at all. Yeah.
Good stuff. If you were to advise the next generation of football execs, Charlie, what would you tell them they must understand before taking on a CEO role at a football club?
Well, I'd sort of hope that before becoming the CEO that they would have done a few other things first in football. I think it's really inadvisable, and we see this a bit, with some particularly new, quite executive type owners who come into the game, that it's really inadvisable for your first job in football to be CEO. There's just so many things that are particular to football that you need to understand and need to sort of have your head around before you get that position, which is the focal point of the whole organisation. And I just wonder whether, my main advice would be don't take the job, right? Go and do some other stuff in football first, even if it's on a sort of part-time basis. A guy who came to me the other day is quite a senior guy in business who said, I'm 45, 50 years old. I want to finish my career working in football. Like, what shall I do? And I said, honestly, what's your local non-league club? Right. And he told me. I said, go and I said, as it happens, I know the chairman there, and I'll put you in touch. I said, go and speak to him and offer your services for a couple of years, right? Helping out with the business side of the club. You're a senior guy. You will be able to introduce him to potential sponsors and all this type of stuff. But also, just offer your help. I bet he'll say yes, right? The club will be hard stretched. They won't be able to afford that many permanent staff. You just offer it. So sometimes it's just you need to get your foot in the door and get yourself behind the curtain to start feeling and seeing how these things work and how the personal interactions inside the club work before you sort of get into that sort of main seat, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I absolutely do. I think you're right. I think it's as roles go, it wouldn't be my suggestion to be the first one that you'd experience in football for sure. And lastly, before I let you go and enjoy your weekend, what do you hope people, maybe not on the back of this, but in general, understand about the role of a CEO in football?
Well, I mean, I'm realistic, right? I mean, we're never going to be the most popular people in the world. So,
No.
It's not, even the ones who are the CEOs of clubs that are really successful still get given a bunch of,
You'd have to turn the club around off the pitch and score the winning goal in the cup final on it.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I think the one thing that I would sort of say of all the managing directors and chief executives I deal with, which like loads of them, is that 90-95% of them are basically good, honest people trying to do a decent job, often under difficult circumstances. And really at least understand that. And if you want to question their competence or their brilliance or whatever it might be, that's totally fine and understandable. But they're not, from my knowledge of the vast majority of them, they're not bad guys. They're not bad girls. They're mostly pretty capable people and dealing with what is a very challenging, multifaceted job. Because don't forget, you're dealing with lots of different businesses within the business. You've got to be a retailer to look over the merchandise. You've got to be a live event person to put on the actual event and make sure that's all done right. You've got to be somebody who is on top of the hospitality side. You've got to be a salesman. You've got to be able to deal with people on the football side. You've got to understand enough about that to not, put your foot in it on that side. And then you've got to also just run the business with your finance people and make sure that, that you're trying to stick to a budget. So this is not a simple job. I've got friends of mine who work in retail. I've got friends of mine who work in hospitality. I've got friends of mine who work in live ticketing and events. But I don't know many people who do stuff across all of these things, right? At the same time, in one day, often dealing with issues and problems across all of these different areas. It's not as easy as it looks, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, and you left out the crucial social worker role as well that you play on a daily basis as well.
Yeah.
Charlie, listen, I've really enjoyed this, mate. I do appreciate you taking the time, especially as you've only just got back to the UK and taking the time to speak to us today. And you've been really honest and insightful as you always are. This has been the CEO show on Football Business TV, and we hope to see you again soon.